Chapter one in the book is a bit different from the other chapters in that it's more of an overview chapter than it is anything else. So it's really an exploration into life. So as you read through this, it should give you a good idea of the kinds of things that we're going to be talking about later on. So if you've watched the walkthrough, you already know that there are three parts to the first chapter, right? Um, the big ideas that they're talking about in the first chapter about the scientific study of life. So we are defined what life is, right? Then the process of science and the unifying themes in biology that we're going to be talking about over and over and over again. So let's talk about the scientific study of life real quick. As I'm going over this with you, one of the things I also want to point out to you is that pictures are very, very important in biology textbooks. Pictures tend to be summaries. So don't ignore the pictures. Sometimes students who are not used to reading textbooks, they ignore the pictures, whereas people who are used to reading textbooks or reading the scientific literature, they look at the pictures more as a summary. So this picture, for example, shows you some of the properties of life. Highly ordered structures, reproduction, growth and development, response to the environment, energy processing, regulation, and evolutionary adaptation. Now, each of these terms means something to a biologist. And the text explains to you what these things mean. Like, what does evolutionary adaptation mean to a biologist? Those kinds of things we're going to talk about in more detail in future chapters. We arranged diversity of life into three domains. And we don't think of it usually in that way, right? But there's the domain of the bacteria, the domain of the archaea, and the domain of the eukarya. And we're going to talk about in the class about what these things mean, what's different between those different organisms. And we're going to spend most of our time probably with the eukarya because those are kind of like us. But bacteria matter. Bacteria matter to us and archaea matter to us. Both of those things matter to our lives too. The domain eukarya is what you think about when you think about life. Um, and actually, that brings me to back to the just real quick to the study of life. Um, if we're thinking about what's alive and what's not, that virus that is upending our life right now, based on this definition, is actually not alive because there are certain things that this virus can't do, and we're going to talk about that too. Um, and that's basically about the. So this would encapsulate the, what is life. Then comes what is science. So science is based on this idea that there's a reality out there. There's something um, that we can somehow measure, what is going on, and we can explain the things that are happening um, in like a predictable kind of fashion by using controlled experiments and repeating things, and so that's what science. It's a way of knowing. It's an approach of understanding the world. Um, it's very, very important when you're doing science that you're very careful. You can't make any leaps, any hand wavy things where you're like, oh, somehow this happens. No, you have to make connections. So, if my mother died in August of pancreatic cancer. She was vaccinated against COVID in March, and my aunt is convinced that my mom died because of the vaccination. There's no reason to make that connection. There's no way, no how. And so as a scientist, you know that in order to go from point A to point B, there's got to be a path from point A to point B that is a logical path that you can take without well, I just believe these things have something to do with one another. And so that's how, so we're, with scientific thinking, we're testing hypotheses. So we're going to talk about that a little bit. Um, And then the next thing, and I'm going to go back to where we came from because it showed it pretty nicely when we come to the unifying themes of biology. The unifying themes of biology that we're looking at are evolution, information, structure, function, energy, matter, and interactions. Evolution is one of those things you see it everywhere. Um, because everything is that exists on this earth is related in some way. We have the same DNA. When you're looking at RNA, DNA sequences, those are conserved through lots and lots of organisms. You'll see that the structure is related um, between different organisms, that different structures in organisms are related to each other, but structure is also related to function. And I'll ask you a lot about why would a structure be the way it is? How does it enhance the function? Form follows function is a term that you're going to hear a lot. And form follows function, function follows form. Because the evolutionary um, the process of evolution favors the ones that's the thing that's more better suited to the thing it's trying to do. But this is gonna make more sense in a little while. We're gonna talk about energy and matter. Energy being, the power that powers everything, but the ultimate power comes from the sun. We're going to talk about that in detail too. But you and I, we don't do photosynthesis, right? We don't live from the sun. We somehow live from the food that we eat. But um, the way we can do this, the reason why we can do this is because the plants took the energy and literally stuck it in the food. Um, and then last but not least, we're going to have to talk about the interactions between different organisms, how one organism influences the life of the other one, whether that's by providing nutrition, by providing the things we need to live, or by harming each other, right? When predator eats prey, and how these interactions are balanced, and that's chapter one touches at all of these things without going really too much into depth about any of them. And so it's kind of an overview of what we're going to talk about in this semester, which is why this lecture is going to be very different from the lectures you're going to see in the future. Um, but that's about what I've got to say about the first chapter. Um, have fun reading, and hopefully, we're going to have a fun semester, and you'll learn a little bit about biology.